We'll talk about EU data infrastructure in Europe and hope that we can, in the UK, maintain connections with these programs and ensure interoperability going forward. We can be part of these projects despite Brexit. I will talk about two EU projects. They're on the top left on this slide, Solvd and EJP, running for 6 years. They finished this year. Those will merge their results, their activities, their energies towards a 7-year program that starts this autumn called ERDIRA, and that will obviously work with the European Open Science Cloud and the European Health Data Space. In these different projects, I'm either a co-coordinator, work package leader, activity leader, and so on. And I provided the Cafe Verium software that I'll mention that's being used by both of these projects to support discovery activities. Today, I'll tell you something very briefly about the objectives of these two projects, the technologies, the lessons learned around all of that, and the achievements, very briefly, of those two projects. Okay, so to dive in, those two projects and their objectives. First of all, Solvd, as you probably would guess, it's a very large project, lots of partners, lots of funding, lots of activities over the whole of Europe. These slides will be shared so you can look up these details later. Emphasize they're very much based around ERNs. These are European Reference Networks, collections of research labs with specific disease interest. So a big community. What is the problem they've tackled? It's this problem that getting a diagnosis for a rare disease is very hard, genetic diagnosis. Often doesn't work. 40–50% is a typical success rate. So the idea here was to see if we can improve on that by creating a very large cohort, doing reanalysis of their data and applying new technologies, new omics methods. So really digging much deeper on a much larger scale to see how much difference that makes to this diagnostic rate. Targeting 4 different groups of patients. First, cases that have been looked at and failed to be diagnosed, just reanalyzing those more carefully. Top left, second, top right, doing deeper, more genome sequencing, essentially. Number 3, very rare cases that there's very few examples of, so you can't look for patterns. And then the unsolvables, common-ish rare disease, if you see what I mean, not uncommon rare disease that have been looked at every which way, and no one's managed to make molecular sense of them. So with these 4 classes, the main challenge was to gather all of those data, put it into a robust data infrastructure, without which you simply couldn't do this project. That was the mission for Solvd. EJ, a very large project, same sort of picture here, but a much wider community from rare disease, from the rare disease world. There are 5 pillars of work in that program. The data infrastructure was called Pillar 2. The goal was essentially to verify the data, to make it findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable. The budget for that was around 20 million. This is what we aimed to do, essentially create lots of connections between lots of different types of knowledge and data resources, so that everything could be found, mapped, related, and so on, for both data and samples and knowledge. So that was the mission there, again, a data infrastructure challenge. Okay, so that's the missions. What were the key technologies we deployed, used, invented? Were as follows. Firstly, this question of should we have tackled them with a centralized or federated approach? The answer is neither. It has to be a hybrid. Both projects realized this and took this approach, but more so, they very much started moving things onto the cloud. And it was apparent that we needed a different type of arrangement for the different data activities. So for discovery, you might go for more federated. For curation, you might go for more centralized, and so on. So for the different types of things you'd want to do to data, with data, you might need a different way of structuring those activities in the infrastructure. Discovery was a big part of this. Without finding stuff, you can't access it, use it, benefit from it. So we focused on discovery very much so in both projects, which is really a way to enable people to enrich rather than purify. When you're doing analysis, you need to get to the exact data and not have any false positives, false negatives. With discovery, it's much more about just distilling out, enriching the assets for the ones of interest. I'll not go through all this slide because I'm worried about time, but please consult this. Discovery is an art within itself, and there are many years of experience behind what we've done in these projects. But the main point, discovery was a big emphasis in both of these projects. You can't create networks and federated systems without standards for interoperability. So these were the range of some of the most important standards that have now become mainstream in these projects, largely through these last 6 years of work. But I will concentrate on the top two of these, because these were developed within these projects, for these projects, and now being more widely adopted. That's the Duck CCE structure and Beacon. So very quickly, Duck CCE is a way to represent use conditions. The Duck part, the digital use conditions, is the structure. The CCE part is the semantics. So just to give you a very quick sense of how that works, this graphic indicates that on the left, the structure of this. So this is the way the different parts of the use condition information relate to each other. And on the right, highlighted in the white boxes, is the content of those elements, the semantics. And to just make that a bit clearer, if we think about the structure involved these parts: the concept of use, the permission rule, the scope, and optionally the details. And all use conditioned statements can have those items, and they can be glued together in a predefined way. For example, the concept of use is use by a company. Secondly, is it allowed or not? Thirdly, for what portion of the asset, for all the samples in the biobank in this example, and any other details about that. So only after the results are published. That structure, we found you can represent all use conditions. That structure, the Duck structure, is now about to be published. The second standard, Beacon. We need a way to make things findable in a distributed federated structure. So this is something we developed. I co-led on this for these projects, and it was in the context of the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health. It is an API framework for querying and responding to queries about the presence or absence of assets. Here is the details of that. Again, I'll skip over this because of the interest of time. But it's a generic framework that could be used for any domain. We've certainly made a specific version of it that we're using in the rare disease context, but the general model is now being adopted in many other domains beyond just rare disease. It's just an example of that. The blue-gray sections are the general framework, and the bit in sort of orangey reddy color there is the only part you need to state the filter. So these are the elements you'd like to filter on in the data. And then in the response, again, general framework, but a way to say, yes, we found something. We found 147 entries, and optionally, here are the details of those entries. So it's a very standardized structure by which we can create very large-scale federated networks for discovery, and that's what we're doing. Lastly, the software that I mentioned, since discovery was very much a big focus in both of these projects, we needed a software. We're using this Cafe Verio software and other options, but this was very much used. This has been developed over 15 years, a very professional software used in many projects. As you see at the bottom there, there listed on the screen are all its features. This is now also going into healthcare settings, so it's been sufficient quality and security to operate behind hospital firewalls. It supports federated networks for discovery, and as shown on this slide, it can be used in many different scenarios. In the middle is the typical scenario. It supports discovery in a network where each installation can support multiple networks. On the left, it shows that it can operate across a firewall securely. And on the right, we show that the different aspects of the data can be separated and queried independently, the results gathered together, integrated appropriately, and handed back to the query node. So it is very flexible in what it can do and very secure. So with those main technical areas, lessons learned, I guess, the standards, the focus on discovery, the beacon, the consent and use conditions, these kind of things were They weren't clear at the start of those projects what we needed, why we needed it, and we learnt those lessons through the project. And all of this is now published and available for wider adoption and interoperability with the rare disease community beyond Europe. So certainly in the UK, I would hope we'd make these connections. Lastly, and this is only just two very quick slides, beyond the infrastructure that we have established and proven, what did the projects actually achieve? Well, for EJP, there is now a network structure. There's a portal you can go to where you can do discovery queries, find lots of different assets from lots of different registries and biobanks and knowledge bases and so on relating to rare disease. And that same infrastructure can be used by individual teams to create private networks and do their specific sub-projects. So that was a big success there. I think it's got a long way to go in terms of fully populating it, but all of the infrastructure is there to do this. And with SolveRD, really impressive result, I think. 12.5% improvement in diagnostic rate. That was 500 more individuals who now have a genetic diagnosis. We found that optical mapping, RNA sequencing, and so on, other methods were really important to find genes that you couldn't find from simple sequencing. This has led on to functional studies and novel therapeutic opportunities. Of all the new things that were discovered, about 15% of those should be clinically actionable now, whereas they weren't before. And with this infrastructure in place, it took typically 48 minutes of expert time to create one of these new diagnoses, and that can now expand going forward. There's a website there you can go and get more information, and a publication that gives the more detailed description of what I've told you today. And that's it. I hope I was within time. Oh, last slide. I put this in because in case it's not really obvious. 6 years ago when these projects started, we didn't know if this was doable, how it would all work. We've done that. So now we have the abilities, the world has the abilities to really join up everything in the rare disease context. So the future is now. I hope we can make those connections between the UK and Europe. Thanks a lot.